Hello, welcome back to the Future Nerd, and today we are going to discuss about object-oriented programming in details. And before that, I have created a brief introduction video for object-oriented programming. If you haven't watched this, please go for it. And you know, in object-oriented programming, we have four pillars. First one is encapsulation, second is abstraction and inheritance, and polymorphism. So let's discuss about encapsulation. Encapsulation states that it is just a grouping of related variables and functions, and it removes the complexity of our application or code as well. So let's see how it happen. And let's say you want to maintain a record of 4,000 students, and you have the properties for each students like roll number, name of student, and the mobile number. And before the object oriented programming, we have to use the procedural approach, and we have to create functions for these type of problems. Like you want to repeat a piece of code for 4,000 students, but at the end the code was very complex, and there is a limited reusability of the code as well. And then comes the object oriented programming that solves the problem out of the box. And the first pillar of the object oriented programming states that is the encapsulation, and it states that you can group the variables and the functions that are related. So these variables and this operation is related to some entity that would be user, and user can have a bunch of properties like roll number, name, mobile, address, its standard, its anything that the student can have, and you can group them. And how we can group them, there comes the class concept that would encapsulate these properties and these operations that can be performed on these variables. So let's create a class. Right click on your project and add a class. We want to encapsulate the data members and the functions for students, so we would create a student class, student, and it would create a class for us. And for class we have an access specifier, and then the class keyword, and then the name of the class, and then the block of code that would hold the properties and the functions in it for that class. So I would explain this later in inheritance session. What is the internal or public or protected or private. So I would create it public for now, and then in that class you can have the properties of students that would be the roll number, the name of the student, and the mobile number of the student. For the property you have to write down what would be the access modifier for that property. I would use public everywhere for now, public integer, and that would be the roll number. roll number, and we want this get set. This get set mean you can set a value to that property, and you can set and get a value to and from this property. It's just like the variable that we have used in our previous sessions. So I can repeat this and change it to string for name student, and then string for mobile number. Okay, we have encapsulated these data members, these variables in our class that we want to repeat for every students. If we have the number of students like 4,000, 5,000, and we can encapsulate this as well in our class. Let's say we have a function like public would be the access modifier, and then its return type would be nothing, it would return nothing, so void. And the name of the function, that would be date values. It would have no parameter, and I would set these variables that we have defined here, and we will get value from the user. Okay, we have defined our first class, and that class has the properties, and that class has a function that would populate the values in these properties. How we can use this in our code? So first remember that the class is just a blueprint, and we would be creating the copy of that blueprint every time whenever we would create an object for that class. Class is just a blueprint, and the object would hold all of these properties and these functions in it. So let's create an object of that class. The object of that class you can create by specifying the class name, the type of the object, and then the name of that object would be student. It would contain everything that we have defined in our student class, and then you are constructing something from that blueprint, so you have to use new keyword and then the class name, and then opening and closing parentheses, and done. That's it. Now you have a student object of that class, and this object would hold all of the properties and functions that we have defined in it. So let's see how we can access these properties and functions. I can access the property followed by the period, and then the name of property. Like we have defined properties in our class. These are name, roll number, and mobile. So I can access this, and I can set its value as well, like future nerd, and I have set this future nerd. I can set the roll number. Roll number would be integer value, that would be 5, and then the mobile number, that would be something like this. Okay, future nerd, and now you can remove these variables because we have encapsulated these variables and the functions performed on these variables in our class student. So if I can set these variables, and I can get the values from these variables as well. I would write console dot write line, we have to import the system library, and in write line I would print out roll number, student dot roll number, because we have defined get set on our property, so we can get the value and we can set the value as well. So I would repeat this, and name of the student and then mobile number. If I would run this application, you can see that I have the output like 5 is the roll number, future nerd was the name of the student, and this was the mobile number of that student. And you can see that we haven't used our function that we have defined in our class to get values from the user. So if I want to get the values from the user, I can skip this because I am not setting it here. I would get these values from the user. I would write student, the function is in the student class, so I would write student dot get values, student dot populate values, and it would have no parameter. So when I would run this application, it would ask me to enter the roll number, that would be 5, enter the name, future nerd, and then mobile number, that would be something like this. And you can see that I have set them and I have printed them in our console application. So now if I want to repeat this, I can create a new object for the student number 2, and I would get these values from the student as well, and I would print out these values as well. I would write console.write line, would print it here like student 2. Before that I would write student 1, and now I want to print the values. Before getting the values for student 2, I would put it here, and now you can see that if I run this program, I would be asked for entering the roll number for student 1, that would be 5, name, the future nerd, mobile number would be this, and you can see that I have printed this out, 5 future nerd and 5151 for the student 1, and then it asked me to enter values for student 2 as well, and I would write 8 and the name, future, just future, and then mobile number would be this. So you can see that for student 2 I have entered the values and I can see the output as well. So I don't have to repeat that piece of code for getting values for the user and for setting these properties. I would encapsulated them. I had encapsulated them in student class. So whenever I want to create a student, I would create a new object of that class, and I would get the values from the user and I would print them as well. So what is this? I would explain what is this. Whenever you want to construct a new object for that class, you are calling the constructor of that class that would construct the object for us and return the object to this variable. And by default you can't see the constructor here, because by default the parameterless constructor is helping us to create this object. It does not have any parameters, so I can define the constructor as well public. It would not have any return type. The constructor would not have any return type because it would return the object of this class. So apparently it would return us the student, and then the name of the constructor would be the student. That was the name of the class. So I would write this, and it would construct the student object for us. We can write whatever the logic we want to put it here. So let's say I want to specify the default value for the roll number, that would be 1. I can put it here, roll number equal to 0 or 1, something like that, and the default name of the user or student, that would be empty string, and the mobile number would also be the empty string. So I can also set these values here as well, the default values for this property and this property and this property, by assigning them 1, and I can specify the default value for this as well, like empty string, and I can add the default value for this as well. So I do not have to put these values here in the constructor. So in sometimes you need to do some extra work or anything that is required to do with the constructor. So whenever you need it, you have to create the instructor with parameterless constructor, and you can also specify a constructor with parameters, like I want to use roll number integer. I want to get the integer value for the roll number, and the string name of that student, and then the mobile number, that would be string as well, string mobile number, and I would assign these roll numbers to the roll number equal to roll number, and then name equal to mobile. And the benefit of this constructor is that you do not have to set these values in here. You can pass them values from here as well, like I am passing the values to create a student object by specifying some values, like I do not want to call this method this as well. So if I want to create an object by specifying some values, you can see that for student I have two constructors. One is parameterless. If you don't want to pass the values to that constructor, you can skip this and you can use this constructor, sorry. You can use this constructor as well, like passing some value for roll number, that would be 5, and then the name for the student, that would be future oops, future, what is this behavior, and then the mobile number for that student, and that is, you can see I spelled the, okay, whatever. Now you can specify the values in the constructor, and the constructor would create an object of this class by assigning these values to these properties, and it would return us the object that would hold these values that we have passed to that constructor. And let's see what is going on. And now if I would run this program, I can see the values that I have passed to that constructor. I have passed 5 roll number, name, future nerd, and mobile number 165161. And you can see that I haven't set these values in our program class. It is also a class. It is also a class. So I have specified these values in the constructor, and I have used these values passed by the constructor and set them to the properties, and I have printed them in the console. So this is also a constructor overloading, like you have multiple constructors for a single class. You can, but the public specifier means that you do not want to, if the specifier is public, it means that everywhere outside this class it would be accessible. But if I use protected, it would not be accessible outside this class, the student, and I cannot use this constructor. Now you can see that if I create a new object for this without specifying the values, it would call the parameterless constructor, but the parameterless constructor is inaccessible because we have set it protected, and we can set it private as well. The difference between private and public access is that the private is only accessible in this class, and the protected method or property or constructor, anything it is, it would be accessible from the derived class as well. I would explain the derived class in inheritance. So in inheritance you would be get it how it is working for the protected keyword. So that's it. Now you can create a class, you can set the value properties of that class, you can create constructors and set them private, public, or protected. You can overload the constructors as well, and you know how to do all of this. So this is the class, and we have encapsulated all of the logic in that class that we would be using.